Suzanne Strumpik-Shea. I'm the writer in residence here at Bay Path College. And about 20 years ago, I heard a few people locally discussing some possible reasons why there are so many creative types here in the Connecticut River Valley and in the Pioneer Valley. Writers, artists, you name it. And the reason that stays in my mind was stated by someone who said, well, we're in a valley, so creativity is trapped within those valley walls. And then the person made a motion kind of like wading, and I just had this great image of that we're all wading through, like sort of up to our necks in creativity, just kind of wandering around here, which might be a great reason we find so many of those creative types down our street, next door, maybe in our own homes. In our lineup of authors today for the 4th annual Are You A Bookie event is a great example of just some of the literary talent that can be found both in this very town and in this very state, ranging from a world-traveling journalist and author who makes his home right here in Longmeadow, to a first-time novelist who runs an esteemed writer's center in the village of Florence. I look forward to introducing all our authors to you, but first I'd just like to thank you for being here today. No audience, no authors, no event. So thank you, all of you. Bay Path College thanks all our authors and our audience for taking the time to be here today, especially during a time when our minds might be elsewhere, to a city or town or neighborhood or street or own home devastated by the tornadoes. I'm confident that today's program might be a welcome break and will interest, inspire, and energize you. I'd also like to thank Brianna Sittler, Bay Path's Director of Special Programs, who's sort of my literary event partner in crime here at Bay Path, for all her hard work organizing today's event. And all the Kaleidoscope events. This is part of the Bay Path Kaleidoscope series of cultural events open free of charge to the public, and it runs all year. We have a great lineup both online and in pamphlets that you'll find throughout the campus and throughout town. So please consider that when you're filling your calendar for the fall and spring. We really have lots to offer here. And this is one of them. This event began 4 years ago as a way for Bay Path to connect both book clubs and avid individual readers with authors. It is part of a series of literary events Bay Path has been adding to its calendar, including evening writing workshops open to the public, the most recent one begun this past Wednesday, and a series of writers' days at which authors lecture on a variety of literary topics. The next one is October 29th, if you want to mark that on your calendar too. Are You a Bookie today offers you the opportunity to meet and mingle with other book groups and readers, peruse the book tables kindly supplied by the college's Follett Bookstore and Pam's Paperbacks of Wilbraham, right by the back door there. Chat with our authors and even try to set up an author visit at one of your upcoming book club meetings. What this is also an opportunity to do is just think, well, what are we reading and what is your club reading? And are you feeling a little bit stale lately? And how do you shake up your meeting? Perhaps if you're reading about a certain part of the world, you might, I know as an author, I've been to one club in West Springfield. If they're reading, let's say, a Polish-American book, they might dress in Polish clothing and serve Polish food. So some people shake it up in that manner. So how do folks at the next table shake up their meetings? And you know, how long have you been in existence? I've been to a book club here in town. I believe it's probably third generation, and it's been in existence about 4 decades. So sometimes we think Oprah came up with this, and certainly Oprah did further the book club experience, but they have been around a long time. So chat with your members and see how they operate, and maybe you'll get some great ideas. At the back table, we have lists of top 10 book suggestions by our visiting authors today, and we invite you to also go online to the Bay Path site and get a list of the previous year's suggestions as well. So don't forget also to fill out evaluations on your table and take some of the book-related flyers at the back table as you leave. But don't leave yet. We're here, help yourself to refreshments and soak in the sampler of readings that we're about to enjoy. The speaker will be first, and a question and answer period will follow the 4 readers who will read. So please hold off on your questions until after the final reader. As for our first person, our first speaker, our keynote speaker, I'm very excited to introduce you to Hallie Ephron. She grew up in another type of writer-rich area, creativity-rich area, Hollywood, and was raised in a family of writers headed by screenwriter Henry and Phoebe Ephron, who wrote such classics as Desk Set and Carousel. In a house filled with books, she was the third of 4 sisters, Nora, Delia, and Amy, competing to be heard. Good training ground for a writer, she writes. But Hallie headed first to teaching, which she says was her first love. Her first mystery novel, Amnesia, was penned with a good friend, the neuropsychologist Donald Davidoff, and together they penned a series of 5 Dr. Peter Zach mystery novels under the shared pen name G.H. Ephron. The real Ephron made a splash writing solo when she turned to psychological suspense. A website fittingly decorated with blood spatters tells us that Hallie's new novel, Come and Find Me, which you'll find at the back of the room, is the story of a recluse who works and lives online and must brave the real world when her sister goes missing. Booklists calls it a suspenseful tale of high-tech skullduggery that even low-tech readers will appreciate. Her other titles include the instructive Writing and Selling Your Mystery Novel, How to Knock 'em Dead with Style, and the Everything Guide to Writing Your First Novel. I'd say of great interest to our audience today would be the Bibliophiles Devotional and 1001 Books for Every Mood, the 2 titles that I just find so fascinating and love to recommend. An award-winning book reviewer for the Boston Globe, where you might see her column every other month. Hallie lives near Boston with her husband and has 2 daughters. 2 seconds into her talk, I'm sure you'll see it's no mystery, sorry I had to say that, why we're thrilled to have this warm and wonderful writer leading the pack here today. So I'll give you Hallie Ephron.
I'm so happy to be here. It's about 10 degrees warmer, believe it or not, in this part of the state than it is in where I live over near Boston. So it was nice driving along and feeling it getting a little lighter as I went. I want to thank Suzanne and Bay Path College, and to also add to your list, there were no readers, there would be no books. So authors are so happy. You know I meet a lot of readers who come up and say, you don't mind if I ask for your signature, you don't mind if I say hello, and let me just tell you, you're just lucky we don't kiss and hug you to death, okay? I'm going to talk about what books are to me. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own writing. I'm going to read my top 10 and tell you why I picked them. And I'm going to start by repeating something that Suzanne said, which is that I grew up in a household filled with books and girls. I'm the third of 4 sisters. Yes, my older sister's Nora. My mother, however, was Phoebe Ephron, who was a screenwriter. She was number 1 in her class in English at Hunter College. She wanted to go to Ivy League school, but my grandparents could only afford to send one. So, of course, that was my uncle, who went to Columbia and basically squandered a perfectly good Ivy League education on football. She was a ferocious reader who doled out her favorite works of fiction to us like candy. And though she didn't make a big deal about it, the stories that she picked generally featured strong female characters. There was plucky Madeline, the diminutive French girl who is not afraid of mice. Eloise, the cheeky 6-year-old in pleated skirt and falling down suspenders who turns the Plaza Hotel into her own personal playground. Dorothy Gale of the Oz books, an ordinary little girl armed with an adventurous spirit and consummate good sense. And, of course, Jo March, the eldest of Little Women. Was she the eldest? I'm thinking maybe she wasn't. Second eldest, that's right. A headstrong tomboy with a passion for writing. Along the way, of course, I gobbled up the Nancy Drew books, the girl detective who drove around in a blue roadster. Surely that planted the idea that I might one day write mysteries. when each of us was ready for our first adult novel, with much fanfare, my mother produced The Blue Castle, an obscure work by L.M. Montgomery, who wrote Anne of Green Gables, which is one of my favorite books of all time. Reading it was a rite of passage. It's the story of 29-year-old Valency Sterling, Valency If that isn't the name of a female protagonist of a romance novel, I don't know what is. A plain little thing, of course, doomed to, quote, hopeless old maidenhood, whose only escape is her imaginary blue castle. When a doctor tells her, drumroll, that she has a fatal heart condition and months to live, she refuses to become a victim. Her domineering family is aghast when she proposes marriage to a rough and reclusive but dashing man. Undaunted by the locked room in which her husband has forbidden her to enter, she tells him, I don't care how many dead wives you have in that room, dear, as long as they are well and truly dead. Still fresh today, this oddball romance is laced with humor, social satire, and features a decidedly untraditional heroine. From The Blue Castle, it was a short hop to Pride and Prejudice. By then, I could be turned loose with the doomed heroines of Wuthering Heights, Gone with the Wind, and of course, Peyton Place. For my 16th birthday, my mother gave me A Room of One's Own, of course, by Virginia Woolf. I could not read it. Although I have since managed the audiobook, there's no plot. And I tell you, I'm one of these readers that needs wheels on my books to draw me along. Just to give you an idea how eclectic my reading is, right now on my bedside table, I have Stiff by Mary Roach, which you may know is this nonfiction series of essays about what happens to dead bodies. It's a wonderful book. It won a huge number of prizes. And Bossy Pants by Tina Fey. Now, just as your book group may have paired Michael Cunningham's The Hours with Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, and if you haven't, I recommend that you do, I recommend you pair Bossy Pants with A Room of One's Own. Now I'm fortunate enough to make my living as a novelist, but it wasn't always so. I was the third sister out of four. The other three wrote, and I didn't. And for a long time, all the writing I did was make lists, have babies, teach, and do a lot of other things. But I love the written word. I relished reading aloud the written phrase, so much that I had a hard time when it came to time to write my first novel, because I knew so well what good writing sounds like. I couldn't tolerate my first efforts, which, like everyone else's, were dreadful. A well-published novel is the prize that goes to those of us who can hold our noses early on and persevere through mediocrity. Now I write books to entertain, suspense novels, and I hope they'll keep you up nights, books that you won't be able to put down. And I don't so much keep in my mind books that I've read when I write so much as Alfred Hitchcock movies. If any of you have seen Suspicion, there's a wonderful moment in it when Cary Grant, the husband, is climbing the stairs carrying a glass of milk to his wife, who's in bed, an invalid, among the satin sheets. Joan Fontaine up there. She is sure that this milk is laced with poison. And Hitchcock shoots back and forth between Cary Grant and the milk and Joan Fontaine, and Cary Grant closer up and Joan Fontaine, and then he's right on the milk. And there's a reason why that milk seems to glow, and that's because Alfred Hitchcock put a light bulb in the milk. And that's what I try to do in my books, is put a light bulb in the milk, is take that commonplace thing, that everyday thing that gives you comfort, and make it scare the daylights out of you. So for instance, Never Tell a Lie, which I'll just hold up, because that's what you're supposed to do when you're an author. That's the first thing they teach you, is about Ivy Rose, a young woman who's about to have her first child. She's had miscarriages and desperately hopes she'll get it right this time. She has a yard sale. Isn't that what everyone does when they're 9 months pregnant? I did. Melinda White, a woman she remembers from high school, shows up, talks her way into the house, Melinda goes inside and she never comes out. Now, the light bulb in the milk moment in that book is in the opening scene, one of them, where Melinda arrives and lays her hand on Ivy's belly. And Ivy can feel the nails, which are French manicured, you know, those white tips. Also, toward the end of the book, Ivy returns home to her wonderful Victorian house, thinking it's safe to go home. She starts up the stairs and freezes, noticing that the statue mounted on the bottom at the newel post is facing backwards, which tells her there's someone in the house. So, of course, I write my fears. In Come and Find Me, it's about feeling like you're safe when you're really not. Oh, I'm supposed to hold it up. Here it is. No matter how much I install Norton antivirus to shore up my computer's firewalls and lock my doors, I'm the one who looks at the pinhole camera in my computer frame, and I wonder if someone is looking back at me. And what if there is? And what if it's someone I trust? When Diana realizes for the third time that day her security cameras are showing her a cardinal sitting in the same spot in front of her house, she realizes something's amiss. So that backward-facing statue, the cardinal on the front post, those are my light bulbs in the milk, and I love reading about them. I love writing them. I'm going to talk a little bit now about my top 10 books, and I confess this is like a Rorschach coming up with this list, because it is so difficult. And one is tempted to put the books in that impress other people. You know, I once read a list of books that you should keep in your living room so that if anyone comes over, they think you're reading it. Well, I didn't do that. These really are my 10 favorite books, and this is why. And with each one, I'm going to suggest what to read it with, because one of the best things a book group can do is pair books. Books that either are about the same kind of theme or written by, for some reason, they resonate together. So I already told you The Hours with Mrs. Dalloway and Bossy Pants with A Room of One's Own. So here are some more. First favorite, in no particular order, is Stones from the River by Ursula Heggie. The only dwarf in a town in Germany, Trudy Montag shares outcast status with its Jews against a backdrop of Hitler's rise to power. She's an unforgettable character who hoards the secret of others and refuses to become a victim herself. Read it with, if you can bear it, The Tin Drum by Gunther Grass, which is another book set in that time period with a dwarf as the main character. He's a man who just simply refused at the age of 10 to grow up. The Bluest Eye, my favorite of the Toni Morrison books, maybe because it's the first one I read. This is the unflinching story of a little girl who feels invisible. And of course, there's the writing, which is more music than prose. My recommendation, read it with Dorothy Allison's Bastard Out of Carolina, which is probably enough. You see, this was how I was able to get 10 more books into my top 10 list. The next one, Like Water for Chocolate by the Mexican author Laura Esquivel. Words seem to smolder on the pages of this one. Sex and food never went better together in this story of three sisters in search for love. I would read it with A Natural History of the Senses by Diane Ackerman. That's a nonfiction book, a sensualist's journey through history, literature, philosophy, psychology, and music. That was A Natural History of the Senses. The next one is a Booth Tarkington book. I encountered Booth Tarkington as a young woman. Nobody reads him anymore. I loved all of his books, and I particularly loved The Magnificent Ambersons. I agree, reading it now, it's a period piece, but it's Tarkington at its best in this satiric novel, a takedown of a young man who is heir to his family's fabulous wealth, as well as its considerable hubris. Read it with The Great Gatsby. The Stone Diaries by Carol Shields. It's the understated story of a woman's life told in gorgeous prose and through the accretion of vivid detail. Read it with Olive Kittredge by Elizabeth Strout. That would make a great combination. I loved the work of Barbara Pym. She's a 20th century writer who is always compared to Jane Austen because she writes so tongue-in-cheek without ever hitting you over the head with sarcasm. She's always twisting what she tells you. And my favorite of her books is called Excellent Women. It's a satiric story of a British spinster raised, and the story raises the radical possibility that a woman might be better off alone. I read it with Pride and Prejudice, for sure. A Prayer for Owen Meany. I like John Irving. I like books with stories, you can tell from my list. And this is my all-time favorite for me of John Irving's. It's a comic and heartbreaking work of art from one of the century's best storytellers and still a parable for our time. Read it with Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, because they're both books about war. Misery by Stephen King. I love Stephen King at his best. Now, he wrote a lot of books, and they're not all fabulous, but when I had to write, Never Tell a Lie has a prolonged section where a woman is stuck somewhere in a room, and I kept going back to Misery to see how on earth do you write that many pages with a character in that confined a space. I'm a sucker for King's storytelling. No one does imprisonment, dread, and claustrophobia, which I love better, or with more humor. Read it with Room by Emma Donoghue, a new book, or last year's book, which I adored. And finally, from my childhood, I know, again, this is not one everyone loves. I'm a big Frances Hodgson Burnett fan. You know, she wrote The Secret Garden, or is it a he? Is Frances Hodgson Burnett a male or a female? It's a woman, yeah, thank you. The Little Princess is my favorite. And in it, Good Little Rich Girl, Sarah Crew's abject humiliation and ultimate triumph are irresistible. Read it with Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery, just because they're both so delicious and they so tap into little girls' dreams. And if you can find it, treat yourself to the Blue Castle. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hallie. I love the idea of pairing books. What a great idea, and I hope that you took some notes and certainly pick up the list on the way out. It's almost like inventing a pizza or a sandwich and, you know, having a new favorite after that. And actually, you mentioned Room, which is in the back at the table, too, just by coincidence. So if you want to pick that up as well for your pairing plans. Thank you so much. Now, our four local authors will give brief readings from their latest books, and some might even speak about the importance of book groups. For three of them, the latest books are also the first books they've written and had published. For one, the newest is just the latest in a successful string of short story collections, a memoir, a collection of poetry, a play, and numerous books for children. That's Corinne Demas. She's a professor of English at Mount Holyoke College and a fiction editor of the Massachusetts Review. Her awards include 2 National Endowment for the Arts Awards, Creative Writing Fellowship, sorry. I've never received one, so I've got to learn how to say it correctly. National Endowment for the Arts Creative Writing Fellowship, that's wonderful. Corinne has kindly driven out to Longmeadow from the Cape, where she summers, but in other seasons lives right up the road here in Western Mass. If you've ever wondered about the workings of any of the many writers' groups here in the Valley, please take special note of her new novel, The Writing Circle, which will land you in one of those very groups for all the inspiration, sharing, and of course, drama that can happen when a room full of writers assembles to discuss their latest work. Let's welcome Corinne Demas.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, and thank you all for coming out. I'm so glad it's a perfect book reading day, isn't it? It's the kind of day we all want to curl up in a cozy place and read, and we still do. And I just love the fact that we still are readers. I'm going to read a little from my new novel. Well, it came out last year, but it just came out in paperback, and it has discussion questions in the back, some of which are actually sort of interesting. Some they made up. You might find them interesting for book groups. But the first thing I have to do is promise a promise that I made to my own writing group to tell all of you that this is not about them. I'm actually a member of 2 writing groups, and one of them are sort of lots of writers. If you go to my website, you can see their pictures, and I actually read this book to them chapter by chapter over a period of several years, and it's not about them. I'm interested in groups. I'm interested in how groups work. I know writers, so I wrote about writers. They're the kind of people I know. And I was particularly interested in the repercussions of what happens when one member of a group betrays somebody else in the group. In my group, there are 6 writers. Nancy is the new one to the group. She's just written a novel that's in the works. It's about her father. It's not really about her father, but it's about her father. And she's a newcomer, so she's kind of got that newcomers thing. How are they all going to feel about me? In the group is Jillian, who is a powerful and well-known poet, which is sort of an oxymoron. She's beautiful, she's amoral, and quite different from Nancy. There's Chris, who's a journalist, who's very successful, writes thrillers, makes lots of money, doesn't have any respect from the other members of the group because he's not literary enough. There's Bernard, who's pompous, but I hope lovable. He writes biographies of musicians. And his ex-wife, Virginia's in the group. She's a historian. They're both remarried. Bernard to a much younger woman whose name is Amy, A-I-M-E-E, and Virginia to her childhood sweetheart. They have 2 grown children together. And there's Virginia, who writes historical fictions very well loved by everyone. And finally, there's Adam, who's the youngest in the group and writes these enormous novels that are verbose, haven't been published yet. And unfortunately, he's in love with Jillian. The scene I'm going to read you a little bit from takes place at Jillian's annual Christmas party. Great way to get all of my characters together. They're all here at the party. And what you need to know is that earlier at Thanksgiving, Bernard and Virginia's daughter, Peachy, invited her parents and their new spouses and her brother all for Thanksgiving dinner. Very brave, if you can imagine, you know, getting your spouses, your husband, your father and his new wife and your mother and her new husband all together for Thanksgiving because she's pregnant and she's going to announce it to the family. And her brother Teddy, she's gotten him to come even though he and his father do not get along, a lot because of this new young wife. And she's going to announce that she's going to have a baby, but her father beats her to it and announces that his young wife is going to have a baby. So this scene takes place at the Christmas party, and Bernard is hoping to find his ex-wife Virginia because he wants to talk to her. They're friendly. They're in this writing group together. It wasn't until after dessert had been served that Bernard was able to move away from Amy. He'd seen Virginia heading on her own towards the front hall, and he maneuvered his way across the room so it wouldn't be obvious he was following her. He found her in the guest room where the coats were piled on the bed. She was rummaging through them looking for something. The fabric of her blouse, a peacock blue, was taut over her back so Bernard could see the indentation of her bra. Virginia was capacious and large-bosomed, her flesh soft, and Bernard had a little pang of sadness that it wasn't his anymore, that flesh to touch. When Virginia looked up, she was startled to find him standing in the doorway watching her. "Bernie," she said, "I was hoping to catch a moment with you," he began. "I just came to get my reading glasses," said Virginia, and she held them up for him. "Couldn't find them in my purse. Then I remembered I left them in my coat pocket." Bernard leaned against the wall. He set his coffee cup on the dresser. "I've been feeling that you haven't been wanting to talk with me. Are you angry with me about something?" Virginia tilted her head and shook it slightly at him. "What is it, Virginia?" "Oh, Bernie," she said, and she sighed. Bernard waited for her to go on, but she didn't. "That was quite a display that Teddy treated us to at Thanksgiving," he said. "Teddy was upset," said Virginia. "You can't entirely blame him." Bernard stood up straight. "Of course I blame him," he said. "He was rude. He was hostile." "He was hurt," said Virginia. Bernard's eyes widened. He was hurt? How do you think I was left feeling? I'd been trying so hard to reach out to him. Virginia sighed again. Listen to yourself, Bernie, she said. All you can consider is your own feelings. I certainly took Amy's feelings into account, said Bernard. I felt sorry for Amy, of course, said Virginia, but I wish you'd think a little bit more about the impact of your announcement on your two children, on Teddy and Peachy. Peachy, said Bernard. Why are you bringing up Peachy? Peachy said she was happy for me. Peachy would say that, said Virginia. Why shouldn't she be happy for me? Asked Bernard. Here's what puzzles me, Bernie, said Virginia. As a writer, you have an unerring ability to get into the minds of your subjects. But in your dealings with the people around you, you seem unable, or is it reluctant, to imagine things from their perspective. And what is this perspective that you claim I can't imagine? Bernie, said Virginia, and she started towards the door. I don't want to be having this conversation with you. Bernard caught her arm. Please, Virginia, he said, don't walk out on me. Virginia turned and looked at him. I'm sorry, Bernie, she said. I don't want to argue with you. I'm not married to you anymore. It's not my job to elucidate things for you, nor is it my job to try to convince you about anything or influence what you do. Let's just be friends. What was I to do, Virginia? Asked Bernard. Shouldn't I have told everyone about Amy being pregnant? You rather sprung it on us, said Virginia. It was sprung on me, said Bernard. Virginia raised her eyebrows. I wasn't going to say anything, said Bernard, but that's the truth. You may have been thinking that I'd planned to enter the world of fatherhood for a third time, but it wasn't the case at all. It just happened. Virginia shook her head at him. You're a grown man, Bernie. Babies don't just happen. You know that. Apparently Amy wanted a baby and didn't believe that I did. I wasn't actually consulted. Bernie, I don't want to know this. If your wife gets pregnant when you made it clear you didn't want to be a father, then it seems as if there's a major problem in your marriage. I didn't exactly make it clear, said Bernard. I just assumed that Amy had no interest in being a mother. Bernie, I'm sorry for you if that's what you want me to be, but I'm really not the one to be talking to you about this. I can talk to you, if necessary, about your relationship with Teddy and Peachy, but I can't talk to you about your relationship with Amy. She was starting out the door again, beyond his reach. Tell me, Virginia, one thing. Is it that you're jealous of Amy? Virginia turned around. Why should I be jealous of Amy, she asked. I don't want to be your wife, Bernie. I'm truly happy married to Joe. Because she's pregnant, said Bernard. Because she's going to be a mother. Virginia came up close to Bernard and put her hands on his two arms as if she were holding him in place so she could lecture him. Bernie, she said, I am a mother. I am the mother of 2 grown children. I have absolutely no desire to be pregnant again. I'm about to become a grandmother. That's where I am in my life now. That's what's appropriate for me at my age. And just so you know, I find it unequivocally the most wonderful thing in the world. She dropped her hold on him and turned from the room. Turned and walked from the room. Bernard pushed some of the coats aside and sat down at the foot of the bed. He reached for his cup of coffee, but there wasn't much coffee left, and it was cold. Slowly, he got up from the bed and started to make his way back towards the party. He talks to other people at the party, and then he goes to try to find his wife, Amy. It's towards the end of the party. He found her in the guest room. She'd unearthed her coat and was slipping her arms into the sleeves. What's up? He asked. Amy's face was tight. Her eyes were shiny beads, so black he couldn't see the pupils. Just tell me one thing, she said. Is there any woman at this party you haven't slept with? What? Asked Bernard. What are you talking about? I just want the truth, Bernard, said Amy. Have you had sex with every female in that writing group of yours? Amy, what is this all about? What has anyone said to you? Your friend Chris assumed I already knew that you and Jillian had what he called a thing in the past. He was making a joke about writers and incest. Am I the only one here who didn't know that in addition to Virginia, you had an affair with Jillian, probably Nancy too? Oh, Amy, began Bernard. Don't lie to me, Bernard. Whatever you do, don't lie to me. I never had a relationship with Nancy, said Bernard. We've been friends since we met at Breadloaf, but never anything more. But you did have an affair with Jillian. It was years ago, said Bernard. He was about to say, before you were born, but stopped himself in time. How could you, asked Amy, how could you have wanted to have an affair with her? She's so... Amy broke off, unable to speak. It wasn't very successful, said Bernard, and it was very brief. But you decided to keep it from me? No, nothing like that. I just didn't tell you. And why was that? Bernard shrugged. It wasn't very important, he said. It's important to me, said Amy. It was long before I met you, he said. What was the purpose? Amy's face looked bloated now, red and bloated. I came to her party, she said. I ate her food. The two of you make me sick. Please, Amy, said Bernard. He knew enough not to call her any term of endearment. I just didn't want to make more of anything. I just wanted to... I've had it with you, said Amy. I'm leaving. I'm taking the car, and I'm leaving, and you're not coming with me. She pushed past Bernard, and when he tried to catch her, she thrashed at him with her fists and dashed out. He started after her down the gravel driveway, but she got into the car quickly, slammed the door. She looked fierce sitting there as she started the engine and waited for the electric seat to rise sufficiently for her to drive. He stood for a moment in front of the car to plead with her, but when Amy revved the engine, he stepped back and let her pass. Thank you.
So don't you want to read the rest? Don't you want to hear her read the rest? My goodness, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. So how far is your commute? Is it to Southwick, or is it to Sturbridge, or is it to Springfield? Since I saw Jonathan Green last, which was here for our Writers' Day 3 at Bay Path, Jonathan told me he's been to Brazil, Jamaica, and is heading to South Africa. I might have missed one other destination in there. But he is a man who gets around for his work. As he said, well, it's my job. And I just think it's just so interesting and amazing. Jonathan Green is a town resident who's also an award-winning author and journalist who heads off to his work around the globe, literally. He has reported from Sudan on the jihadist militia, the guerrilla-controlled jungles of Colombia on the cocaine trade, corruption in oil-rich Kazakhstan, the destruction of the rainforest in Borneo, and human rights abuses connected to gold mining in West Africa. Author of the critically acclaimed nonfiction book Murder in the High Himalayas, the brutal account of the murder by Chinese border guards of a 17-year-old Tibetan nun fleeing to India, has won awards including the Amnesty International Media Award for Excellence in Human Rights Journalism. And it's just out in paperback, so we have both hardcover and softcover at the back of the room. His work has appeared in publications including Men's Journal, the New York Times, the Financial Times, British Gentleman's Quarterly, and Esquire, and the Mail on Sunday. And he's been interviewed on CNN and the BBC Radio and Television. And he's with us today. Please welcome Jonathan Green.
Thanks very much. I wasn't quite sure whether I was going to read a little bit of my book or talk about the importance of sort of book clubs, and because I walked in and Brianna said, well, if you have any stories about what positive things book clubs can do, then perhaps you ought to talk about that. Well, I do have quite a powerful story about it, which I'm going to share with you, and I've made all my notes on biggest napkins, as I'm used to working to the last minute. So back in sort of 2006, there was a little piece of sort of footage which made its way onto CNN and the BBC. It was gone in a flash, but it showed a stream of refugees up in the high kind of Himalaya near Mount Everest, walking through the snow at very high altitude at 20,000 feet, where the air is half what it is at sea level. And they were making their way up a mountainside. Then all of a sudden, Chinese paramilitary kind of soldiers jumped out and opened fire. And they started firing on this group of refugees. And just by chance, overlooking this was like a group of Western climbers who were climbing a mountain called Choyu, which is 15 miles east of Mount Everest. And one of them very bravely taped all this. So he smuggled out the tape. It made its way onto TV, and it passed in a flash. You know, we've got like the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. There's all manner of other causes around the world. So just one person falling in the snow didn't really make a difference to the world agenda about what's happening. But you could clearly see on the video a small kind of figure folding in half and then falling in the snow. Well, I watched this like everybody else, and I decided that I wanted to write a book about who that small figure was falling in the snow. What was her name, and where did she come from? And of course, the first thing everybody says, well, because you're out of your mind. Because in order to get up into the Himalaya and Tibet, it's fiendishly expensive. You have to work undercover because Western journalists, are not allowed to report in these areas. So that then also makes it extremely expensive. So anyway, I started work, and I went there undercover, and I hiked up in the mountains, and I met kind of refugees coming through, and I found out that the tiny black dot falling in the snow was a young girl called Kelsang Namso, who was escaping Tibet, which is occupied by the Chinese, with her best friend, Dolma Palki. There were two best friends from a very rural part of the country whose dream was to meet the Dalai Lama. In order to do that, they'd have to cross like the biggest mountain range in the world. They'd have to cross 3 countries undercover, and they'd also have to get past Chinese kind of soldiers who have standing orders to shoot anybody like escaping the country. So these two very brave young girls lit out with 73 other kind of refugees, and they made their way across when, just before they were 20 minutes from the border to kind of freedom, the Chinese kind of soldiers opened fire. Kelsang was shot. She fell down. Her best friend escaped. And it was through talking to her kind of best friend that I was able to understand the story. I was able to piece that up with undercover work I'd done in Tibet. And slowly, like, my book formed. So because it took so long, and it's incredibly hard work and arduous, when you finally do produce a book, you're just incredibly kind of grateful that people buy it, because it's tough stuff, and you know, and it's expensive. I mean, it takes huge amounts of money to do this kind of type of work. It's very, very hard to get the money back. So every time anybody buys the book, it not only helps people like myself who are having a very hard time sort of funding this type of work now, but it helps sort of spread awareness of what regimes in the world are doing with sort of human rights and other things. But just to go back to the theme of Baker's book clubs, I gave a talk about, I think it was about 5 months ago, at Springfield Technical Community College, and because they sort of have a book club there too. And the guy who asked me to give a talk said, well, you know, like the students here get extra credit for coming along. So, you know, people are kind of, you know, they have a sort of ulterior kind of motive and this, that, and the other. So, you know, but still talk. And, you know, it didn't really sound all that kind of appealing. But I went along and spoke, and people just became enraptured in this story. And we showed the film because of what had happened and who the girls were. And everybody said, oh, you know, you're not going to sell hardback kind of books at one of these events. Well, because I sold all the hardback books, and they all went. But also, there were sort of members there from the Springfield Technical Community College Baker's Book Club, and they read the book, and they were so blown away by the sort of bravery of this young girl, 17-year-old Dolma Palki, who really risked everything to talk about what had happened to her friend, that they had a collection, and they raised $340, which they sent me, which I was then able to send to Dharma Palki in India. And with the money, she has been able to buy half a flight in order to get to Europe to claim asylum. So I can't think of a sort of better example of how book clubs can really help. So I just want to say thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan had told me about the successful sales side of that day, but I didn't know the rest. That's really great. What a beautiful story. No, readers rock. I know, definitely. None of you, again, none of us, as you said, we don't get to do this for a living as we do. So thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. Our next reader and author calls herself a literary late bloomer. But I think anytime you get around to accomplishing a goal you've set for yourself, you should be proud of yourself, as I am very proud of my friend Ellie Mearpole, who began writing seriously in her 50s. Formerly working as a registered nurse and then a nurse practitioner, she authored during those 24 years 24 articles and book chapters about pediatric issues and latex allergy. Ellie has taught fiction workshops and is the former book publicist and book group coordinator at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley. And in that capacity, 3 years ago, she was our very first keynote speaker here at the You A Bookie Day. So it's really wonderful to come full circle and see her here with a book of her own. She's a founding member of the Rosenberg Fund for Children and has had stories published in The Drum, Portland Magazine, Patchwork Journal, and the Women's Times. Her first novel, House Arrest, is a transfixing story set partially in Springfield about the relationship between a home care nurse and the pregnant patient under house arrest. She and husband Robbie and their 2 cats live right here in Western Mass, and she's here today to talk a little bit about her wonderful first book, which I hope you will enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. Can you hear me? You hear okay? I think I've always been a bookie. My very favorite photograph of myself was taken when I was a freshman in college, and I was sitting up in a tree reading. And you know, when you have a picture, a mental picture of yourself, that's the picture. I don't look much like that 18-year-old anymore, but that's still my mental picture of myself. I love that feeling of being inside an imagined world, living deeply a story that somebody else has come up with. And I love books that tackle the issues of our time with all of the contradictions, the complexities, and the human wonders. So I began writing in my 50s. And then 6 years ago, I quit my day job and started working at the Odyssey Bookshop. It had always been one of my dreams to work in a bookstore. And, you know, bookstores don't pay much, but you get all the books you can read. So that's a pretty nice deal. At the Odyssey, I organized author events, and then after a couple of years, became the book group coordinator. I lead a open fiction group at the bookstore. Open meaning anybody who's read the book is welcome to come. I've also been part of a book group, a regular book group that meets in people's houses, and we've been meeting since 1994. We call ourselves the Stones and Bones book group, and that's because we realized early on that so many of the books we loved had stones or bones in the title. Some of the ones that were mentioned, Stone Diaries, Stones from the River, The Bone People. If you think about it, those 2 words just show up an awful lot in titles. In February of this year, my first novel, not the first one I wrote, mind you, but the first one that was published, came out. It was 2 months before I was eligible for Medicare. That was really a very sobering thought. That book is called House Arrest. And it was sparked by a very short article that I read in 2000 or 2001 in the Boston Globe. It's set mostly in Springfield, much of it in Forest Park, and it's about the unlikely and life-altering friendship between two women. I'm going to read you a little bit from the first chapter. Like I said, I tried to get out of the assignment. I just found out about Pippa that morning. I had been listening to my voicemail at my desk in the far corner of the staff nurse room. With the phone scrunched between my shoulder and ear, I was constructing a house of cards on my desktop with leftover supplies from the day before. It was a delicate moment, balancing 2 sterile dressing packets, one in each hand, along the slope of the bandage scissors for the peaked roof, when my boss appeared. Marge, the owner-manager of the Hampden County Home Care Agency. She slapped a Form 44A, a new patient assignment sheet, on my desk. My hands jerked, and the fragile shelter collapsed. New intake this morning, Emily. A prisoner. Prenatal visits. She swiveled on her alligator heels and headed towards her private office. I thought I must have heard wrong. A prisoner? At her office door, Marge stopped to examine her reflection in the window glass. She's under house arrest until her trial, wears some kind of ankle monitor. She's pregnant? A stupid question, since she said prenatal, but my brain froze at prisoner. The panic in my voice must have snagged her attention because she turned around. Early second trimester. Her name is Pippa Glenning. Priority intake this morning. Marge licked her finger, pressed it against a stubby eyebrow hair that stood straight up, trying to flee her face. Marge's eyebrows often appeared to operate independently of each other, but this morning they moved in perfect agreement. Except for that one escaping hair, I forced my attention back to her words. You'll report every week to her probation officer, Marge was saying, to let them know she's cooperating with the medical program. Why the house arrest? I tried to strike the right balance of curiosity and respect. You had to be careful with Marge. Her first baby died under suspicious circumstances, cult ritual in the park. Her fetus is under protective custody. Marge's mouth puckered like the words tasted nasty. That's when I remembered the frozen babies case. It had been in all the papers 2-3 months ago. That woman? I stared at Marge. You've got to be kidding. Marge's eyebrows arched and leapt as she turned away and entered her office. This time, I followed her to the doorway. No one entered Marge's private space without an invitation. I counted under my breath to compose myself before speaking. 1 nonviolence, 2 nonviolence, 3 nonviolence, like my father taught me when I was 7 years old and furious at the neighborhood boys for teasing fat Marta next door. Can't you assign her to somebody else? I grasped both sides of the doorframe, hoping I didn't sound as desperate as I felt. I'm just not comfortable with this kind of thing with courts and cops. Ms. Glenning is your assignment. Marge thumbed through the pink message slips. If you have a problem with it, perhaps you'd prefer to find another job. She looked at me and smirked. Marge would have loved any excuse to sack me. And while there were plenty of nursing positions available, not many would allow me to start at the crack of dawn and be home by mid-afternoon when the special ed van delivered Zoe home from kindergarten. Marge had a lot of rules and regulations. Some don't make much sense. But breaking the rules was what got my father into so much trouble. I didn't know Pippa yet, but I already suspected she wasn't much on towing the line either. Me, I follow the rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Another one. You want to keep reading and hearing. What a great choice. I love to meet authors and then find out what they've written, and it's almost like we get to just lift the top of the heads off and say, oh, you're the mystery person, and you're the real-life drama person, and you're this, and to see just what people can come up with, and sometimes in a whole career, the variety and span of books can just be so amazing. So I even just love to just go down the line here and see what people have written. Our last author, certainly not the least, is the author of another debut novel, Outside the Ordinary World. And Ellie was just talking about being outside of things. Well, Dory Ostermiller's book, Outside the Ordinary World, explores family dynamics and mother-daughter bonds, always wonderful fodder for book club selections. She left her native California at age 24 to pursue a Master of Fine Arts degree in writing at the University of Massachusetts, right here in the Valley. And since then, Dory's work has appeared in numerous literary journals, including the Bellingham Review, Alligator Juniper, Chautauqua Literary Journal, and the Massachusetts Review. Founder and director of the Writers in Progress Literary Arts Center in Florence, Dory is the recipient of a Massachusetts Cultural Council Artists Grant and a Tobias Wolff Fiction Award. She lives in Northampton with her husband and daughters and writes in the same place. And if you are looking for a wonderful place to be mentored, learn more about writing, do certainly visit or explore the site for Writers in Progress. You won't be disappointed. So you can meet her here today. Dory Ostermiller, please come on up.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you all for being here and for being readers. Everyone's expressed how important that is. I have a 13-year-old daughter. I can't get her to read a book. It's kind of heartbreaking. You know, she's into technology and texting and the internet and, you know, with all these things competing for people's attention now, I'm just so happy that there are still readers in the world and book clubs and that you are the people who really are keeping ideas alive. So we count on you. I came to writing as a little kid. I think I was in 5th grade when I read Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain and decided I wanted to write like that. I realized as I was writing my top 10 that the books that I chose all have something to do with family, with mothers and daughters and fathers and lovers and husbands and children, you know, and I don't know really what book doesn't touch on those themes. You can go all the way back to the classics and the Greeks, you know, for that inspiration. But I really think for me, the impetus for my writing career came from my own family life and from my troubles in family life. So I started writing in my adolescence shortly after my parents' divorce, and I became sort of an accomplice in that divorce on my mother's side, and it was disturbing and troubling, and I really needed to write about that as a young adult, and lost myself in books about it too. So I started writing Outside the Ordinary World in my early 20s, and frighteningly and embarrassingly didn't finish it until my early 40s. It had many incarnations. I took breaks along the way to have my own children and to start my business and to teach a lot of writing workshops and get my master's degree. But really the book was laborious and torturous for me to write, and it took many, many different forms and many revisions. So I'm hoping the second one won't be like that, especially since I'm supposed to write it really quickly. What I ended up with was a story that was very different than my own story, very, very fictionalized account. The more I wrote, the more fictionalized it became. I realized that I was either a natural-born liar or a fiction writer, so I chose the latter. It sounded better. But it really did contain the nugget of truth at the heart of my own experience, which was about loyalty and family secrets, and how we sort of inherit the work that our parents leave undone, and what we do with that as adults. So my narrator is Sylvia Sandin in this book, and she is a 42-year-old woman who has been an accomplice as a child in her mother's affair. Subsequently, she runs far away from home, just about as far as she can get, from the California foothills of Santa Ana to New England. And she sets up her life as an adult pretty much as an antidote to the toxic brew of her California childhood. And she gets married and has some children of her own and cuts off contact with her original family, thinking that she will never make the same mistakes that her mother made, thinking that she will never go down that path. And then, of course, 30 years after the original events, she finds herself in a troubled marriage with a lot of pressures. They're renovating an antique farmhouse in Ashfield that's just a total sinkhole. Everything is kind of falling apart in this family, and she finds herself lured by a man that's outside of her marriage into a world of secrets and down a path that she never thought she would take. So what this does is it really forces her to go back and confront her own childhood, which has been tidily shoved under the rug, which she has not really dealt with. And it forces her to kind of relive her mother's experience, as well as understanding her own role in the events that actually led up to her father's tragic death as a child. So that's sort of what this story is about. It's a parallel of two stories, the adult narrative as Sylvie finds herself drawn down this path that she really, in a way, feels she can't resist, and yet she doesn't want to do it, but it almost feels like her subconscious is pulling her towards a reckoning of some sort. And at the same time, you go back and you understand, you start to see the events that happened in 1974, when she was a child growing up in California in the Seventh-day Adventist Church with these parents whose marriage was coming unglued, and a mother who was indoctrinating her really into a secret life. So I'm just going to read you a little bit at the beginning of this story. I'm going to start off with the prologue. I'm pacing circles in the family therapist's waiting room, trying to discern what my daughter is saying on the other side of that door. Hannah hasn't spoken to me in days, but she seems to have plenty to say to a stranger. I can hear the muffled inflection of her voice rising and falling with some thick emotion, her footsteps beating the length of the wood floor. I time my own gait to match hers step for step across the narrow, windowless room. Though I've never been taught to believe in purgatory, it must be a place like this, where we hold our breath while the stories converge. A land where we linger, mourning our nature like obstinate children whose parents warned them about the crack in the sidewalk, the fissure in the glass, the lethal fork in the trail. The night my father died, a Santa Ana wind sent tumbleweeds as big as these waiting room chairs across our yard. Lying on my bedroom floor, I heard the dry clapping of palm fronds, people's trash barrels bumping down the street. Around midnight, the electricity sputtered out. They say we often know the exact moment of a loved one's passing. I remember sirens, and in the blackness felt my body expand as though it would fill the house. The weight of my guilt pressed down like water, massive, immovable. I got up then, stood on tiptoe to reach the secret boxes in the upper corner of the closet, and brought them bulging with contraband into the night. It was almost impossible to light the fire pit in that swirling wind, but I kept at it, lighting match after match, holding each letter firm until it caught, curled, and blackened in the flame, until the boxes were finally empty and bits of ash scattered and danced across our patio. Then I hopped the fence, joined with the wind. I walked until an orange dawn bled over the San Gabriel Mountains, until I could no longer feel my feet, until my mother finally drove up beside me and told me to get in. Until 2 days ago, I hadn't spoken to anyone of that night. 30 years and 3,000 miles from that history, I can't believe it's come to this, pacing past the stacks of parenting and family circle, while my 13-year-old on the other side of that door makes her case against me. Don't we all assume we'll do it differently, not repeat the past? We believe with all our hearts that we can rise above the things they couldn't. Sometimes our belief blinds us. And then I'm just going to skip ahead to a couple of pages back in 1974 when Sylvia is 12 and she meets her mother's secret friend at a church potluck. She's met him once before, but it's been about 6 years since she met him. The next time I saw my mother's secret friend, I was nearly 12 and had just learned that Jesus would come on a cloud shaped like a man's fist. I learned this from our Sabbath school teacher at our Seventh-day Adventist church, Mrs. Sullivan, who kept her black hair wrapped around her head helmet style. My sister and I called her Iguana Woman. She seemed that scaly and cool, skin pale as plaster behind her bright makeup. Her voice was reptilian, too, as she whispered about the last days, about fire and falling boulders, as if these things were secrets she wasn't supposed to tell. In the car on the way home, Allie and I would sometimes roll our eyes and snicker at Mrs. Sullivan's grim predictions. But I never forgot the image of that cloud, its silent, impossible fury, the way endings can surprise you like that with a crack and a flash when you least expect it. I learned about the cloud on a dry June morning in 1974. Fires burned in the Santa Ana foothills, turning the air milky brown, bringing the occasional distant wail of a siren. My mother woke us with her morning song, high heels clicking against the Mexican tiles as she sang, "Good morning, Mary Sunshine, how did you wake so soon?" Her voice was clear and intrusive as a shard of glass, and it worked. By the third or fourth time she clicked by my door, I was awake, anticipating the Sabbath morning hustle. My father would be sitting at the dining room table in his dress shirt and slacks, sipping his coffee, finishing the Los Angeles Times. Already, at 7 a.m., he'd have committed several sins against the church: the coffee, the newspaper on a Sabbath, the fact that he was not attending church with the rest of us but heading off to work. My mother never verbally chided him for these transgressions, but each time she swished by in her buttery yellow church dress, she heaved a small sigh, pressing her lips into a crease. He took no notice. It was a Saturday like any other, except for the pungent smell of ash as we emerged from the church sanctuary, made our way across the blistering pavement. Today was potluck day, and Mom had decided, against our will, to participate. As she rummaged in the car for paper plates and cups, Allie and I stared at the sky, the brown columns of smoke rising on the horizon. "Maybe it really is the end of the world," I said, elbowing Allie in the side. "Maybe Mrs. Sullivan is right." "I bet our whole neighborhood's on fire," Allie murmured in the direction of our mother's bent back. "And our mother thinks this is a good time for a picnic." "All right, girls, all right." Mom emerged from the back seat with her paper grocery bags, her red handbag dangling from one elbow. "Do you think you can manage being pleasant this afternoon?" She thrust the bags at us, smoothed her sleeveless dress over her hips. "It's 100 million degrees," Allie whined, "and the food here." "Now listen." Mom looked hard at us. "There's someone meeting us here today, okay? A dear old friend." And before we could ask, she was strutting toward the meeting room, hoisting her pocketbook up her shoulder. She was the only person who did not cower in the heat. She didn't glance towards the blazing hills. There was nothing we could do but follow her. Thank you.
I love what you said about shoving something under the rug. I think that's what we writers do, whether in fiction or nonfiction. We lift up that rug and see what's under it and what can we say about it. So thanks for reminding me about that. And thanks everyone on our panel today. And I'm sure there's at least a few questions out there after these presentations. Brianna is going to do the Phil Donahue thing and run around with a microphone. So if anyone has a question, just raise your hand. Author's favorite colors, cars. Oh, there's a question here.
How has the ebook craze affected your sales? Positively, negatively, and just what do you think of all of it? I still enjoy holding a book in my hand. I must admit I bought it.
That's a great question.
Are these live?
Should be here.
First of all, it's not a craze. It's here to stay. It's just the beginning, don't you all think? Yeah, and it's helped my books. My books sell really well on Kindle. I don't know how others feel about it.
I'm less afraid of the Kindle sales than I am about the online non-sales. I get Google alerts daily about my book that's appearing as free downloads on websites that are in China and Romania and all over the world. And as soon as I send them to the publisher, and as soon as Hyperion, which is part of ABC, gets after them, they close it down and then they pop up someone else. My editor calls it a whack-a-mole. And so I'm delighted that people are finding alternate ways to read books, and Kindle is very useful for lots of people for lots of situations. But I'm a little bit concerned about the fact that many of our books aren't, they're just out there in ways that aren't really legal.
Mm-hmm. Like you, I prefer the physical book, but I'm so glad that people are reading in any way, in any form, that I think we're just going to have to get used to it. And I think, I'm not sure if this is true for the rest of you, but actually royalties are very similar for ebook as for regular books. So authors, unless it's pirated, authors still make a roughly equivalent amount, small but equivalent amount, for those books that are sold as ebooks.
Actually, that's not true. Authors really take a beating on hardbacks because a Kindle is so much cheaper than a. See, my hardback sells for some ridiculous amount of money, 20-something dollars, and I get some tiny little percent of that. If it sells as a Kindle, it's a smaller sale, and I still get the same percent. So you can see that since they're now publishing Kindle, and we call it Kindle, ebook, and hardback at the same time, at least for me, we will now be making less for selling the name, fewer for making the same. Can't help editing myself. Than we would so over your career. If you're in hardback, it makes a difference.
Yes, because I think that's right. I mean, it's really hard in this sort of climate at the moment to sell hardback books. I mean, they're $26 kind of dollars a pop, and unless you're already known and kind of famous, then publishers aren't really going to put a lot of money into promotion. So you're really sort of looking to get your book out in any way. And I know that when my book was launched, because a year ago the Kindle kind of sales were excellent, and because a lot of climbers were downloading it sort of even in so when they were on the mountains, I think, which was just extraordinary. So I mean, that helps.
I'm one of those people that's going into it kicking and screaming. I think it's inevitable. You have to give in to the times, but I still like vinyl too, and I there's no hope for people like me.
Thank you. Another question? That was a great one. Is it just? It's like bidding. I thought someone had their hand up.
Maybe I can just add, it's going to affect bookstores even more than authors. That's really
Yes.
the terrible impact. I mean, it's so easy now to buy a book, and if you know anyone who hasn't has an e-reader, they're buying a lot more books because it's so easy. It's scary easy. If you have one, you know. It's like, you know, going down the supermarket aisle and not picking up a pack of gum. But the bookstores, particularly the independents that don't have those storefronts on the internet, they're really getting killed more and more.
There's a question up there.
New York was filled with secondhand bookstores. One, music bookstores, there was a category for everything. It was wonderful. Now we have this brand label developed, but those bookstores are filled with people. So there's still a good want for a book.
By the way, authors don't get a penny from a used book. Just a reminder. I buy lots of them myself, so I'm a guilty party.
Any other questions?
Hi, I have a question for Jonathan. As a journalist, when you approached that video piece and decided that you would like to do a book on that young woman, you could probably just say you have to buy the book to find that out. But how arduous was it for you, or complicated was it for you to find a friend? And did you have a publisher who allowed you to do that before you took the story on, or what was the process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It sort of started like with the magazine piece first, and that because it enabled me to get up into the kind of Himalaya and the mountains and to really see, because what the backstory was, you know, to understand that there were 3,000 sort of refugees a year coming over the mountain. So I got sort of funding in that sense, but that's only like a sort of keyhole to the wider book and kind of narrative. Then I got another sort of magazine piece in Men's Journal magazine, which told the story from the perspective of the climbers. Now the climbers sort of witnessed this murder and they decided not to talk about it because they didn't want to lose their climbing permits. So what you have is a murder in broad kind of daylight, and then people not talking about it because it's not in their financial interest, which I found, which I was appalled by. So that made me angry. So then I decided to write a book about it. So then at that point it was finding a publisher, but it's like with non-kind of fiction, it's very expensive. You know, when you're operating in Tibet, you know, so the government, because doesn't kind of want you there, so you're having to work with like illegal guides, like you have to pay people all the time to help you. So, you know, it was sort of bits and starts, and then I got you know, like a couple of small grants which helped. But, you know, you're never really going to make the money back, you know? I mean, it's a labor of love. But, you know, like the book has really raised a lot of awareness about this, because this is happening all the time. But the Chinese kind of government, anybody who gets talking to Western journalists goes to prison for sort of 15 years. So they're trying to sort of close down every avenue because of research, because you have, I mean, here you can go and interview people all you want. You can sit for hours and hours and hours. I have to be very careful about like approaching people, because it's not me that's going to get into kind of trouble. It's the people that are sharing stuff with me, and that's what kind of makes it really expensive. Because to keep everybody safe, you have to make sure that you're not doing things which are reckless. So, you know, and like there's a lot of friends of mine who've also done sort of similar books. I mean, you're never going to make the money back. You know, I mean, unless it becomes a movie, which like we hope will happen. But
Do you ever consider making it into a novel? Because it would make a crackerjack mystery.
like there was a guy, because he wrote a novel about it.
You could write a novel about it with you as the main character.
Yeah,
You get thrown in prison. I see the whole story.
Yeah. I mean, you know, well, like a little bit of professional, you know, I like the real story is so compelling.
Not the real story. No.
No, because I understand that. But so my point is because that the real story is so powerful and so compelling, And because I went to sort of such extraordinary lengths to bring all the facts out, because that's what's needed in this realm, I think that it has to be nonfiction.
I'm sitting here between the war between fiction and nonfiction.
And I'm thinking, a pseudonym, you need a pseudonym.
Too late now, I think.
Was there another question over there? Karen?
Before I came over, I was watching a segment on a Sunday morning show about blogging, and so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, do any of you have a blog, and do any of you see this as a way for potential who would be writers to get started?
Who'd like to start? Ellie, you just mentioned that you lengthened your top 10 list on your blog, right?
When I signed the contract for this novel, my publisher said, 1, you need a website, 2, you need a blog, 3, you need to do Facebook, and 4, you need to do Twitter. And at that time, I had none of those, and I really didn't have any interest at that time in doing any of it. But I knew that my publisher is very small, independent, nonprofit, and that they were not going to have the resources to do very much promotion of my book, and that most of it would be up to me. So I created a website and I started a blog. And I have to say that blogging is really fun. It's very, very different from writing fiction. I mean, a blog posting is usually a 300 or so word. Personal essay is probably the closest way I can describe it. Some people blog only about their own book and how it's doing, and frankly, those are really boring. You really have to find something to blog about that you're interested in, the way you're interested in your novel when you're writing a novel. So I write about what I'm reading more than anything. I write about the books I'm reading. I write about some of the things that happen when you publish a first novel and you have an opportunity to sort of enter into that conversation about literature in a new way. And that's a very exciting thing. And so I've found myself writing about that. And I write about politics and political activism and other things that I'm interested in the world. So for me, blogging has been very interesting, but it's a very different process from writing fiction. And so when you say, is it a way to get started as a writer, I think it depends on what kind of writing you want to do. It's fun, it's easy to get started writing a blog, and I found it just an additional way to be part of this whole writing community that exists in the world.
I just want to say that Ellie's blog is terrific, and I want to start a support group for writers who hate blogging. I did it really religiously for about 4 months after my book came out, and then I don't think I've updated mine since November. So I just, I find it really difficult when you're working on your own fiction. I have 2 children also with special needs, and I'm running a business, and it's the publisher putting pressure on authors now to do all of this publicity and marketing, and I know that it can be rewarding too. And the people that do it well, my hat's off to them. But I think it's hard for authors to find time to do all this stuff. So it's a new era where we have all this pressure to you got to be on Facebook, you got to have a website, you got to have your blog, you got to update all these things, and you could spend 20 hours a week doing that stuff. So you really have to balance it out.
Yeah, I'd be really concerned about the way blogging can sap your creative energies. I mean, I have the same situation. I have a very active website. I tweet or twit or whatever it's called, and I go on Facebook. But the blogging I've done is mostly guest blogging. I'm going to hold this up because he told me to. I have a YA novel that came out in April called Everything I Was. And let me tell you, the people that are doing the blogging are the teens, and they're wicked bloggers. They just blog constantly. I think they blog but never read the blogs. I think that's all blog out but no reading in. And I think that in a way, if you're writing quality literature, you want to have a little time to think and you want to have a little time to develop. And I think you should be careful about all of these new things that just give you the illusion that you're making connections, but in some ways are taking you away from, I think, what writing should be about.
Yeah, like I think that's true. Like there is like enormous pressure on us now to blog and tweet and all the other stuff. You know, we've elected to take on a job where we get paid to write. All this is free. And like the latest thing is that, you know, there's some sort of trend where, you know, publishers are saying, everyone's saying, oh, you know, people's attention spans now are so short, so you have to keep adapting. Well, apparently people's attention spans now are so short, but they don't read the blog. So now, like, you have to Twitter all the time because it's a sentence. So, you know, not only do you not get paid, but the word counts get smaller and smaller, and I can't see it really kind of helping us. I mean, I don't know.
I'm on a blog with, there are 7 or 8 of us. I blog with a whole group of writers, and it's fun, and so my week only comes up once every 8th week. So it's Deborah
That's a good
Crombie,
idea.
Julia Spencer Fleming, Hank Philippi Ryan, me, a bunch of we all write mystery. We don't write about our books. We write about, oh gosh, this week we're writing about root beer floats, you know. And we have a lot of readers, and we just relax about it. And sharing it is just a great way to go. As a way of launching a writing career, it's got some upsides and some downsides. One is you're giving it away. You should not be giving away your writing. I know that's a revolutionary idea, but you should be paid. And the other thing is, once it's out there, it's hard to pull it back. So, you know, a publisher all of a sudden is interested in your novel, so you've been putting it out on the internet, scene by scene. They want to know, is it already published? The answer, if it's in your blog, is yes. So why should they publish a book that you've already put out on the internet? That's not to say you can't build audience so that then you can say, no, none of this has, but I have 1,000 people following me every week, and so that's my platform. That's that golden word they want to know about platform. So can I just make one completely inappropriate announcement, which is if there are aspiring writers in the room and anyone's interested in a writing workshop over a weekend in September in Connecticut, I have some flyers that you might want. My little commercial.
Thank you, wonderful. Actually, yeah, one more question, and then we'll progress to the ceremonial sweatshirt. 2 more questions. Distribution.
This question is for Ellen. Was there a moment or an experience that would tell us that you're completely changing your career?
Not one moment. I've always been a voracious reader, and I noticed that more and more over the years, when I finished a book, I would sometimes think, I could do that. And sometimes I would think, oh, I wish I'd written that book. And I started paying attention to those reactions. And then in the year 2000, my husband wanted to write a book. And so, like a good wife, I made all the arrangements for us to take a 2-month sabbatical. Now, we both worked in fields that don't recognize the concept of a sabbatical, so this was not simple. But we spent 2 months on an island off the coast of Maine so that Robbie could write his book. And I had one of those light bulb moments. Oh, I could write. This could be my chance to have a break from my 50, 60-hour-a-week nurse practitioner job and really try my hand at writing fiction. And so I did. And I just sort of took advantage of that situation. I had never taken a creative writing class. I prepared for it first by taking an online class. If you ever go to New York City, you may have seen those yellow boxes on street corners, that's Gotham Writing School. I signed up for one because I figured that if I really sucked, nobody would know me. So it was sort of anonymous. And I just became totally hooked. I took a writing workshop with Dory. I did a low residency MFA program, which is how I got to know Suzanne. I just got totally hooked. And I suppose it was one moment that you ask about, that light bulb moment of saying, this is the opportunity. This is the time to really try this.
One more question?
I think I just kind of follow up on the blogging question. I find that I barely have time to read books I want to read, never mind, read blogs and fail. I have a great blog, and writing a great blog. And so sort of a question about the writing and also the book club members. Do many of you read various blogs regularly? But you also don't have time for it.
I'm addicted to Tom and Lorenzo. Nobody knows what that is, right? It started as an addiction to Project Runway. They blog every time Project Runway, and they're just so dishy. And it's all about what people are wearing in the fashion magazines. And I confess, I check it every day. That's the only blog I read.
Any others?
T-Lo, if anybody wants
I read
to.
I read my friends' blogs occasionally, and I really love Carolyn Levitt, who's a novelist in New York, has a fabulous blog. She interviews a lot of other writers, and I find out about a lot of great writers through her blog. But generally, no, I don't take much time for that in my schedule.
Because a lot of my work is journalism, I really only try to go to the sources where the information is accurate. And the problem with kind of blogs sometimes is that they're produced by people who have no journalistic, investigative kind of background. So very often it's wrong. And when you are writing because magazine articles or books, particularly non-kind of fiction, you have to be very careful that you don't use stuff like that. So I really try and avoid them, particularly with work. So
I do read blogs. I read blogs about books. So other people's ideas about the books that they're reading and new books that are coming out. And there's a blog that I particularly love called Books on the Nightstand, which is run by, it's sort of an extracurricular activity of two reps for Random House who are wonderful readers, and I just think they do a great job. So I read book blogs. I don't read other kinds of blogs.
Corinne, you?
I read blogs when people send me links to blogs that they've written, and you can get a whole sense of the blog sphere out there because so many people are writing them. I was a guest blogger on a guy named Chuck Sambucino, who has a very good blog that's about yes, it's about writing. He asked me to write about writing groups one week, but I looked at you can look at all the backlogs of blogs, and there's a lot of really good advice that different writers had written in too. So if you want to check that out, it's good for writers.
What's the name of that one
Chuck
again?
Sambucino, and it's through Writer's Digest.
And the former editor of Writer's Digest, Chuck's good friend Jane Friedman, has one of the best blogs about writing as well. Jane Friedman is a very common name, but if you look her up under writing, she's got a great blog too.
You could, those of you who go to my website, I have cards here. If you go and you can link, I have my article on his blog, you can link to there, and then you can see he has a very good listing of blogs on all the different topics. And there are a lot of how-to, roll up your sleeve articles for writers. And then they also have all the comments that people write in, so you get a lot of feedback.
Just a show of hands, do we have a lot of blog readers here? 1, 2, 3. Ah, okay. Well, Dory's books are not on that list. They will be posted. Yeah.
Sorry, I turned them in late.
You'll get them someday.
I will be adding them to the website that we have. Right now, there's a couple hundred from the past 4 years, but I'll be adding hers tomorrow, and it'll probably be uploaded by Tuesday.
Thank you. So, I think that will close this portion of the program. So please feel free to meet and chat with our authors, with your fellow book clubbers, swap ideas, get new titles to read, visit the book tables in the back, have your signed copies. Christmas and all the other holidays are coming, so think now while the folks are here. And maybe find yourself feeling a little bit of the creativity that is so prevalent here in the Valley. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Judith.